Okay, so today you got two handouts, and no, I'm not off my rocker. I did give you assignment 107, even though the next one would be 104. But that's because assignment 107 is actually the final for the class. And so I'm giving this to you now because now's when we start on it. And then you're going to continue working on it for the next couple months, and then you'll end with the final. And so I'll go through kind of some of the details of it first. You can, of course, read it. We'll go through this many times as we go forward, but it's good to kind of introduce it as a project to begin with. So the final project of this class is a portfolio of your work. That portfolio of your work needs to include all of the assignments from this class. So you will have 6 assignments to include in this portfolio. It has to include those. It does not have to include all of your exercises. So exercises are separate. You can choose to include those if you want, or some of them if you want. But you don't have to. You do have to include your assignments. If you're in another class here, let's say you're in 121, you're in 220, any of those kinds of studio-based classes, you can, of course, include your work from those classes. If you do a lot of work on your own and you're a painter, you can include that content in your portfolio. So anything above and beyond the stuff that's in this class is great. By all means, include it. But the reason that I don't require anything more than this class is because I at least have 6 things that need to be in your portfolio. Does that make sense? So you have to include the stuff that's in your class, in this class. I'm also not under any delusion that you wouldn't, like, you would keep this in your portfolio forever. Like, you know, the assignments that you do in this class are not necessarily your best work ever. You might include them, but you probably, by the time, let's fast forward 2 years, you're applying to Berkeley and you want to get into a particular studio and whatever, showing your digital tools for architects work from 2 years ago, probably not relevant. So it's okay to cut those out. But the format of the portfolio may work just fine for you to kind of get the ball rolling and then be able to update it and include your other content as part of it. Your final project, your final portfolio here is worth 30% of your overall grade. It is due at 9:30 a.m. on Monday, December 11th. So it's a little bit earlier this year. I always pick the Monday of finals week because I know you have plenty of other stuff to do and you don't want to worry about your portfolio when you're dealing with all your other stuff. So it is the first day of finals. It's due that Monday. I will bring in donuts. You'll have a donut. You fill out a survey about what you liked about the class, what you didn't like about the class. You'll turn in a physical portfolio to me. This is the one assignment that I actually grade the physical version of it. So portfolios are still kind of a physical document. So you still need to be able to hand it to somebody. They need to look at it. So how it comes together, how it's printed, all that stuff matters. And we'll talk through that, and nothing to panic on just yet. I will grade that printed version. You will also post the images online as a backup, but I'm grading the physical version of it. And if you want it back, which some people do, I can give it to you next semester. If I tend to come in on Wednesday of that week, if I finish the grading and submit the grades and you're around on Wednesday afternoon, I'll give it back to you on Wednesday afternoon if you really want it sooner than that. But generally speaking, it takes me the full day on Wednesday to get all the grades done and submitted, etc. Let's see. Remember that it is final schedule that day, so you guys will be here from 8 to 10, thereabouts, eating your donuts. Life is good, right? I try to make it enjoyable, right? It's better than your other finals, I hope. So you guys will be here, and class ends at 10 that Monday. You do not have this class on the Wednesday. So technically speaking, because this is a 3-hour block of a class, we have both final times. So I could make you come on Monday and on Wednesday, but I don't. So you don't have to come on Wednesday. But you do have to be here on Monday, and it's over at 10. I will not accept any work for the class after 10 on Monday, that Monday. Does that make sense? So like you're doing resubmits, you're doing comments, any of that kind of stuff. If it happens after 10, doesn't count. So everything has to be done. Course is closed, nothing more, etc. So we're going to break this portfolio into several parts as we go through it. The first part we'll talk today about kind of general layout and getting started, and it works nicely because we're working in InDesign. We'll continue along. We'll do cover design, And what will happen is we'll do this piece of work, we'll work for a day, then we'll take a break, and hopefully you'll keep working on your portfolio. And then we'll get to the next kind of day in class, maybe in a month, and we'll revisit the portfolio, we'll talk about it, we'll update it, we'll add more content to it, and then it'll get a little bit further, we'll get close to December, and then I'll start putting in a couple portfolio days to work on them, get you feedback on them, and that sort of thing. So it is something that starts today. It's something you should be working on all the way until the end, the 11th, when you turn it in. If you wait until the 10th to do your portfolio, it will not turn out well, and your grade will not turn out well either. I've had too many students in the past who have waited and said, oh, I can just do that portfolio at the end. You can tell, and it never turns out good, and their grades suffer because of it. So don't wait until the end. Do it now. Right? Start on the process. It takes an evolution, and I'll revisit this. The other thing is I will go and I have a bunch of old portfolios that people have turned in before that they never picked up or that they donated to me to use as examples. I'll bring those and put them on the back today so you can go back and look through what other people have done to get yourself some ideas. I haven't done that yet, but I will do it as well. I do also have grade sheets coming back for you today. So after I'm done lecturing, I'll come around and I'll give you your grade sheets back for assignment 102. I noticed that I didn't ever switch the projector over, so that doesn't help us here. See if we can get it switched over. Are there any questions about the portfolio? No, I'm sure there will be along the way, but... The what?
Not yet.
Not
No
what?
questions yet.
No questions yet. All right, so let's talk about portfolios. So I spend the day today kind of introducing the concept of portfolios. I'm going to use a couple different examples. One example comes from Alex Holgreff, who has a website called Visualizing Architecture. If you've never visited that website before, you really should, because he's amazing at this kind of stuff. And a lot of the work that we do in the class is based loosely on the things that he does, because he's very, very good at visualizing design, etc. So I'm going to show his portfolio as one of the examples. But before we get into the examples, I want to talk about what is the fundamental essence of a portfolio. Why do we do a portfolio in the first place? Really, the portfolio is a story of you and who you are as a designer. We use this portfolio, let's say we're going to get a job. You want to get an internship, you want to get a job. What's the first thing that they ask for? Well, maybe they ask for a resume. But what's that other piece in the design field that they always ask for? It's a portfolio of your work. It could be a printed book. It could be images. You could be submitting it in a variety of ways. But essentially, the purpose of a portfolio is to make you stand out against all the other candidates that are applying for the same position or job or school, etc. So the big things that you're going to come across with portfolios right now, at least for the next couple years, are either going to be internships or they're going to be school. Sometimes scholarships, but not always. So school, internships, you're going to have a portfolio. Remember that there's a bunch of people that are applying for the same position that you are. So what makes you special? This is how you can show what makes you special, is through your portfolio. I would say generally portfolios err too much on the side of, these are the skills that I have. Okay, it's really easy to say, I'm great in Photoshop, I'm great in InDesign. Look at all this stuff that I've done in those two softwares. Maybe it's Illustrator too. And a lot of times it's organized by, here's all my Photoshop work, here's all my Illustrator work, here's all my InDesign work. Well, when you think about giving that portfolio to somebody, let's use the job example. Okay, you give it to somebody to get an internship, and they're looking at your portfolio and they say, okay, this person has pretty good skills in Photoshop. This person has decent skills in InDesign. Well, this person's not that great in Illustrator, right? Okay, that's good. Well, I could probably use them to do the low-level work to just get some stuff done, right? Maybe they're good in AutoCAD. Yeah, I can hire them as a draftsperson and just put them to work during door and window schedules. Something not very exciting. Let's reverse the tables and say I have a portfolio that's based on design rather than being based on the skills that I have. And I show them how I'm able to think, how I'm trying to solve problems. And I'm putting all of my skills together to showcase a particular idea. Okay, well, in this context, the person who's looking to hire somebody says, wait a minute, this person's kind of interesting. They have some good ideas. Maybe instead of just hiring them to do the grunt work, maybe I'll hire them and bring them into a few meetings. See if they have some creative ideas. Maybe I can bounce some ideas off of them. So they're treating you differently because you're showing yourself differently. Does that make sense? There's a big difference here. So don't fall under the trap of, these are the skills that I have. Right? It's easy enough on your resume to say software skills. Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, AutoCAD. You can list those. It's different to show you as a designer. Make sure to tell the story of you as a designer and the things that you're interested in. So in this context, I'm going to tell a story about some students that applied to Berkeley. And this is probably 4, 5, 6 years ago. I had 2 students that were in my class. Both were very good students. They both got A's. They were good students through the rest of the classes here at DVC. They both transferred to Berkeley. They both got in. Awesome. Okay? So they showed up to 100A, which is the first design studio at Berkeley that you get into. And again, I'm talking specifically about architecture here. Sorry, Chris, but it is what it is. They show up to 100A, and on the first day, the head professor says, okay, everybody show me your portfolios. I want to see your portfolios because we're going to divide up this group into their subsections. The way a studio works in Berkeley, you might have 80 to 100 people in the overall studio, and then they break you into groups of 10. And so they have to decide which group of 10 do you belong in. So one student of these 2 students had been working on their portfolio, had a very updated portfolio, and said, great, I've got this great portfolio. It's got all this stuff. I'm really interested in Rhino. I'm really interested in Grasshopper. I've got all this computer stuff. That's what I'm interested in. That's me. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to study. The other student, good student, but wasn't particularly prepared for this day, and said, oh boy, I need to put some stuff together. Let me get a bunch of stuff from 131. I'll get some freehand drawings. I have that. OK, that's easy. Okay, so he showed a portfolio of freehand drawings. It wasn't really him. They were interested in the same thing. They both wanted to do Rhino and V-Ray and all that stuff. So they show up on that first day. They show those 2 portfolios. Well, guess what? One student, the one with the Rhino and the V-Ray and all that stuff, he gets placed in the advanced studio with all the computer stuff. And they're going to do V-Ray and all the interesting things that he wanted to do. The other student gets placed in the, we're going to do everything by hand studio. We're going to draw everything by hand. That was not where he wanted to be placed. So he didn't tell the story of him. He didn't tell the story of what he was interested in doing. And that's really a big deal. You have to make sure that you're telling that story of you. I'm really having trouble with projectors today. I'm sorry. Such is life, right? So the next part, let me make sure I didn't skip. Next part is to have an introductory page. So you can't just jump right into work. You need to have some kind of a table of contents. That table of contents probably lists the projects that you're going to show, gives a little overview, something like that. It's not a bad idea. It also probably identifies you as the designer. This is a portfolio of your work. Your name should be somewhere around this. We're telling you where the projects are in the portfolio and kind of the title, what they are, that kind of thing. And it may contain additional information about yourself. Some people like to wrap in a little bit of resume work with this as well. Keeping your portfolio current. So this is another big one. You're applying for a job. We don't want to see some project that you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Okay, so for me, I've been out of grad school 10 years. Do they want to see my grad school work? No. Do they want to see my thesis work? No. They want to see what I'm currently doing. That's up to date. So you don't really want your projects to be more than 3 to 5 years old. The portfolio is always a living document, and it needs to be updated constantly. So if you create a good framework for your portfolio, putting in the new content is easy. You do more work. You do your projects in 121. You do your Calder Museum. You do your Mondrian Museum. Both of those go in. Then you move on, and you're doing 220. And you do your 220 project, and it's the architecture studio, and you put that one in. Then you move on to Berkeley, and you do a housing project. Well, before too long, that Mondrian Museum or that Calder Museum, it falls off the other end, becomes less important. So you keep it current with your best work. And this shouldn't be a surprise. As you move forward in school, your work's going to get better. So the older things, like the digital tools for architects class, you remember that class? That was a really old class. I took that a long time ago, right? That gets chopped. It gets cut. That's the way it works. So you want to make sure that it's current. Generally, if you think about trying to update it every semester, that's probably a good plan. Know the purpose of each project in your portfolio. So remember, this is a story about you. And if you are putting this project in your portfolio, why is it going in your portfolio? What does it show? What is it trying to show? Generally speaking, the more diverse this is, the better. If you just have like, oh, I'm really good at V-Ray renderings, and every project just has a really pretty V-Ray rendering with some collage in it, it's not necessarily showing your full breadth of skill set. Yeah, you're really good at V-Ray rendering. Can you do anything else? So you want to make sure that it has a purpose. So avoid repetition, 3D rendering after 3D rendering after 3D rendering. That's not to say you shouldn't put 3D renderings in, but maybe you put one really good one in, and then the next one you concentrate on this great physical model that you built. And maybe the one after that you did some sketches or some diagrams that were really good, and you use those sketches or diagrams as an emphasis in that piece. So you're using each project to show something specific. It's showing the diversity in your projects and in your skills. So maybe it's you did a bunch of museums and then you do a housing project. So you're trying to show that breadth. And there's a reason that these belong in your portfolio. Group work. So this is a really sticky one. So you guys in school will frequently end up doing group work. You work together on the Cal Poly Design Village project. You work together in your 220 project. You work together in your 221 project. Okay, so this is a frequent occurrence. Well, if you're going to include your group work in your portfolio, don't just include all the group work. Include the group work that you specifically worked on, because that's your contribution to the group. You also have to be very clear that this was a group project. If you show anything that wasn't your own individual work, you have to be very clear that this was a group project with other students, because guess what? You apply to school, you apply to work at an internship, there's a pretty good chance that one of the other people in your group is applying for the same internship or is applying to the same school. So the people that are looking at your portfolio are saying, wait a minute, I'm seeing the same work twice. What happened? So you want to make sure it's clear that this was group work, and then you want to emphasize your specific contribution to the group. What is it that you did as part of this group? And make sure that shows through. A killer portfolio is well designed. There's no doubt about it. The more time you spend graphically to create a good quality portfolio, the better the portfolio is going to be, the better your work is going to show. If there's errors or there's misalignments or there's problems with the graphic design, the people that are viewing your portfolio will get hung up on those issues and won't actually look at the content that you're creating. The best portfolios, the portfolio itself goes away and the people become so immersed in your work that that's all they care about. That's good design. So you want to think a lot about this. Great portfolios take time to create. So I'll tell you a story about me applying to grad school. So again, this is a ways back. I was getting ready for grad school. Obviously, the portfolio is a big part of getting into grad school and showing your work. So I started working on this portfolio in July. The application was due in December. So I had about 6 months to work on this portfolio. I did 7 complete portfolios. I finished 7. It took me 7 to get the right one. I tried a bunch of different things. I talked to people. I asked what their opinions of them. Was it clear? Was it not clear? I went back to some of my old professors and I showed it to them. Was it good? Was it not? And I learned a lot in that process, but it took those iterations to finally get to a point where this is a good portfolio. This really shows who I am and the things that I'm interested in. So don't be afraid of that iterative process. Keep designing in it. If you get done with the portfolio in this class and you learn that it didn't quite do it, go back and do it again. You have winter break. Spend those 4 weeks wisely. Redo your portfolio. I wish, when I was going back to grad school, that I had a better portfolio going in. It took me 7 tries because I didn't have a portfolio. And I had to create one from scratch. If I had started earlier in my undergraduate career and I started adapting and building this portfolio, It would have been a lot easier because I would have already defined who I was and what I was interested in showing. So when we start to talk about setting things up, there's a few things, and I'll go through a live example in InDesign as we set this up. But we have to think about some special things in InDesign that we haven't thought about before. The first one is what potentially our binding might look like. And so depending on how we choose to bind the portfolio or make the book of the portfolio, we have to compensate for that. And in this case, if we're doubling the inner margin versus the outer margin, we have a pretty good shot at accommodating whatever kind of binding we're going to use, if it's a spiral binding or whatever. So make that inner margin a little bit bigger if you have facing pages. The other thing is we have to talk about something called bleed. Anybody know what bleed is? No? Not yet. Okay, you will. You'll become familiar. Okay, so let's say that I work for a magazine. I know people don't really read magazines. You read them on your iPads now. But let's say in the old, we're Time magazine. Okay, we're going to read this Time magazine. We're the design company. We go through, we get it all set up, and we send this magazine out to be published at a publishing house. And they're going to make, I don't know, how many, what's the distribution of Time? 1 million copies? I don't know, as a guess. So you're going to repeat this process and you're going to make these magazines. What do you think the chances are that all of them are going to be printed perfectly? Pretty unlikely. All right, chances are something's going to get off a little bit, something's going to get trimmed a little funny. So what production houses do is they create something called bleed, which is a little bit of extra space that goes all the way around your magazine or your document or your portfolio, such that when you trim it or when you cut it to the size that it's going to be, you got a little left over. So for example, if I didn't have bleed and I went to trim my page, in this example, let's say that instead of doing an 8.5 by 11, a full-size portfolio, I was going to do an 8 by 8 portfolio. So I was going to cut it down. And if I made my content exactly 8 by 8, and I went to the paper cutter and I tried to trim it at 8 by 8, and I didn't quite do it perfectly, there'd be a little extra white border along the top. I wouldn't have full bleed of my photo. It wouldn't go off the page. So we deliberately give ourselves a little bit of extra image so that when we cut it, if we don't quite cut it right, it's not the end of the world. So we're going to set something like this up in InDesign on purpose. We're going to set something up called bleed so that when you go to have it printed, you've got a little extra space that can then be cut off. Is it absolutely critical for the kinds of things that we're doing in this class? No, you could get away without bleed. You could just print it on the laser printer, it would be fine. But recognize that the laser printer won't print full color. It won't go all the way to the edge. There's going to be a little border around it. It's inevitable. So you have to be aware of that. If you go to a professional print house to have this made for you, they're going to ask for the document with some bleed. Because when you go to trim it, you want that full color. So the one last thing is that because this is a print document, the color space should be set up as CMYK, or it should be intended for print. The reason that it's CMYK is because these are the inks that are going to be used coming out of the printer. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and key, or black. Those are going to be the colors that are used. So we want to be in that color space. So here it is, kind of set up. We have, in this context, we have our inner margin right here, a little bit larger than our outer margin here. The dotted line is just the margin. For what we're doing, it doesn't really matter that you have a margin. But this outer line that goes there versus the inner line right there is the bleed. It's that extra little 1/8 of an inch that runs all the way around the outside. And so I'll talk you through how to set this up in InDesign so that you're ready for it. So let's look at some examples. This is the Alex Holgraf example that I told you about that I was going to go through. This is his Volume 3 portfolio. He has since done Volume 4, and he's currently working on Volume 5. So if you go to his website, Visualizing Architecture, you can see his various examples of his portfolios, and you can actually buy them if you want to. And these are pretty good examples of really nice, clean portfolio work. So here's his initial page. So remember, we talked about that table of contents, that first page that's the introduction to you and what you're trying to do. And if we were to look at this page, recognize that all the ones that I'm going to show you are actually split here and they're facing pages. So as you imagine flipping the pages, right? This is a spread. It's 2 pages together and they're split down the middle. So everything that I show you is this spread as we go through. And so if we look at this, we have the table of contents, we have a date, we have a nice column of these little graphics that represent the various projects, and then we have little descriptors about the various projects. So there's going to be 4 projects. Also, on the facing page right here, this is that additional information. In this case, he's showing his website address and a little information about himself, and then he has some filler text because it's not quite ready to be published in this particular example. So this is that introductory page. Contents, a little bit of information about you, that lives as its first spread. So let's move forward into his first project. This project is called the 9-square cube. As we start to look at this, there's a couple things I want to point out. One, there's a really nice flow line that's happening right there across the page. Remember, this white line represents the page that we would be flipping across as we were turning the page. We have a little icon that represents the project. So in this case, he's used this icon and it will repeat page after page in the same location, and I'll show you as we go through the next page. And he set up a few other things like the yellow background that's semi-transparent that's going to reiterate itself as we go across page after page. So let's continue to the next page in the portfolio. Here we go. The yellow theme stays the same. We have this little bit of yellow showing up, and notice also that 9 cube square shows up in those upper corners exactly as we should. So this could be a page number, for example. It's just some designator that says this is what this particular project is. If we look at this in terms of 2/3, 1/3, there's our 1/3, here's our 2/3. So there's 2/3, there's 1/3. In this section, we have 4 distinct columns there, but he's also choosing to have the text go across 3 of the 4 columns. Remember, we talked about breaking that modular grid. We move on to the next one. Our flow line is consistent. It used to be at the top. Now he's moved it to the bottom, but the proportions of it are the same. We've changed projects. Our little indicator has changed, but it's in the same place. Same idea, but it's a little symbol that represents the project. Fonts are the same. Graphics are the same. Continue moving forward. There's our There's our 2/3, 1/3. So that's consistent. The flow line here went from the bottom of the page up to the top of the page, but the proportions there to there are the same on either page. Next page here, 3 columns and 3 columns. Oops. Our graphic symbol stays the same, except it's moved down here. That bothers me a little bit. I think it really belongs up here to be consistent. But obviously, he made that choice. But it's 3 columns, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. Those are consistent page after page. We've seen those 3 columns before. Notice also that we have the 1/3, 2/3. If I were to skip back a slide, right, there's our 1/3 line. Sorry. Told you, I'm just having issues today. It is what it is. There's our 1/3 line. As I go forward, the same line is going to be in between right there. So we're consistent page after page. 3-column layout stays 3-column layout. Now, of course, it's really nice because he has like beautifully gorgeous renderings. So this obviously it helps show. And there's subtlety to how each of the images itself is composed. So not just are we dealing with the graphic design, which is what I'm talking about here, but each of the individual images is composed really nicely and shown really nicely. So it helps, certainly. But same rules here, even though this is a full color spread, right? We have the really nice bottom flow line with our 2/3, 1/3 setup. The other thing that I think he does really well is he keeps the space in between the images small, but consistently small. So every single one of those little divider lines is the same size, but it's a tiny line. It's just enough white space to let the images stand out. Recognize this is a big color spread, lots of renderings on it. And that white space really allows it to breathe. Notice, though, we still have the 1/3, 2/3 falling right here. There's my 1/3, there's my 2/3. So it's really consistent page after page, even though the content is changing. Every single image that I've shown you has flipped from drawings, renderings, right, diagrams, and they're all within the same context or within the same framework that he's set up for this particular project. So let's use another example here. And I'm going to come back and I'll do a lecture on all covers, and we'll talk about the different covers as we go forward. But this is a very, very nicely done cover. Subtle, but nicely laid out. And as we go forward and we see his first page here, could be a she, I don't know. This is not one of my students. It was something I found online. Recognize, of course, that we have the same thing where we have a division in the page. One turns to the other. By the way, it's a little hard to see the outline of the page. It's here and there, just so you can see. It's a square. It's probably an 8x8 square. On the right side, we have our contents. Again, little mini graphics that identify what the projects are, a little bit of text, and then obviously the page numbers there. On the facing page over here, a little bit more content this time. It's a full resume on the inside of the page. This is convenient if you're applying for an internship or a job, because there's not two pieces of paper to get lost. Here's my resume, here's my portfolio. It's all in one right here. So that helps because you're not losing documents, etc. The other thing is the portfolio needs to be small enough. I'm going to ask that you make it smaller than 8.5 by 11 or 8.5 by 11, because as you're applying to some job or whatever, they don't want a big unruly portfolio. They want something small that can go in a file that they can carry with them when they go to Starbucks to review it or whatever. So you want to keep it small. So we move into his first page here. Very consistent. Font choice is really nice. It's subtle but clean, and it's going to repeat itself page after page. We have a 2/3, 1/3 layout, much like we had before. There's a little bit more blank space in the middle of this, but I would argue that this is my 1/3 and this is my 2/3, and I would include the blank space as part of these images in that context. Move on to another example. There's that first introductory page. This time there's no information about the person on the inside here, and there's no graphics. So it's a very different way of setting this up. But it's still very consistent. Here's the various pages. Here's the projects that are going to be on each page. Move forward a page. This is the full resume. So instead of including it on the facing page over here, right? Instead of including it right there, they chose to make it a separate page, next page in the portfolio. Here's the first graphic page that's set up. Pay attention to the fonts and the way that this is set up, because I think it's really well done. Again, it's clean. It's very timeless. It's not going to become dated long term. We have the small caps in context, or a smaller size of all caps. It's really set up nicely. Notice also that the graphics of the page, even though it's a full rendering for the whole page, it's set up really nicely in perspective, such that it has some nice strong diagonals as part of this. The only issue that I would have with this particular setup, and again, I'm picking on these people. I don't know who they are, but here I am up here picking on them, is that the fold of the page happens right here, and that fold happens right where the building is that you're trying to showcase. So if you imagine opening this portfolio, it depends on how it was bound, but as you open that portfolio, there's either going to be a binding in the way or a bunch of holes or something that go right through the building. So for me setting this up, I would move this probably over here, or maybe this direction as you start to set up that rendering. So you want to think about the content and how that lays out as well. Another example here. Really nicely done, a little bit more fluid in its layout. But we really do have our basic 3-column setup following consistently across these pages. Next set, 3 columns again. 1, 2, 3. This side has 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. To me, in this particular example, there's no little white space that runs between these various floors. And I think if you put just a tiny bit, a 1/16 of an inch, they would read not as a continuous block, but as individual pieces. So there's a little bit too much collision here. So like I said, it's easy for me to be up here and critiquing these particular pages, but this is how you learn. Remember, it's part of why I make you do comments all the time, is you have to figure out how to articulate what's working about this page and what's not working about the page. So in this particular example, I think just a sliver of space between those would help them to breathe and would help them to read as individual floor plans rather than one big floor plan. OK, so I'm going to show Bashir. Anybody know Bashir? He was a student here a couple years ago. He was around for a while. I think he's in Prague now. And I'm going to show his portfolio because it's exactly the same projects that you guys are working on. Now, this was after he was done. So it might include some of the projects that you didn't work on. But it does have like the Calder Museum and the Mondrian Museum and that sort of thing. So this is a student example that's, I think, relevant. First page is that index or contents page. Again, no graphics on this. But here we have our introduction. We have our various projects. He also included some fabrication stuff and some software, and then some theory pages, etc. His portfolio was very long. It's worth it to point out that there is no page limit in this class, so you can have it as long as you want. For applying to a job or an internship, generally there's no page limit. If you're applying to school, however, there is usually a page limit. So you want to pay attention to what that is. When I was applying to grad school, we got 12 pieces of paper. Now, of course, we all did them double-sided, so we got 24 pieces of paper. But that was it. That was all you were allowed. And so you want to pay attention to what that limit is as you go forward. So anyway, he did a lot of freehand drawing as part of his work. So he did an introductory page, 3 columns. Right? So there's 1, 2, and 3. The drawings divide into those 3. If I drew a little straighter, they'd be in the 3 columns. The text also falls into 3 columns, except that there's a blank piece here. But again, it's a consistent 3-column layout. We move into the next page. 2/3, 1/3 on this side. The drawings here are 1/3. The text here is 2/3. And then we have the big showcase drawing piece. And again, he was emphasizing kind of this sketching thing. He gets into his 3D renderings a little bit more because he was trying to show the breadth of what he was capable of doing. So we move into the first example here. This was I think it was the Mondrian Museum that he was going through, talking about museum lighting conditions. Notice the mix. Remember I told you this was a story about you and that each project should have a purpose. So here we are, and he's showing physical modeling. So the first thing that he did was he showed a bunch of freehand drawing. Then we flip the page, and suddenly he's showing how he's modeling out these various pieces, and he's mixing that in with some very technical CAD drawings. Then we move forward, and we get into some more. Look, I can laser cut. This is how I was setting things up. Beautiful photograph because the background is blurred nicely, but you get the idea here. Again, a lot of light studies about what's happening in the various buildings. Then we move in, and we get into the more ephemeral 3D rendering style. Again, 2/3, 1/3 layout. We get into some more technical drawings, a little bit more rendering. So everything's showing something different. This had to do with the actual fabrication and assembly of pieces for this particular project. So you see this evolution. Everything he's showing has a purpose. He's not repeating himself. Into more true 3D renderings and setup, etc. So his portfolio, I think, is on Issue if you want to look it up specifically. These were some of the websites that I borrowed some of the content from. Like I said, I'm going to bring into the back all the portfolios from last semester, or grouping, I shouldn't say from last semester. They go all the way back to when I first started teaching. So you can see stuff from 2007 on. And you can get ideas for the kinds of things that we're going to set up. I'm going to switch over, though, and we're going to walk through some InDesign stuff for this setup. And then I'll bring those portfolios in the back, and you guys can have a look there. So hold on for a second while I switch over. OK, so thanks for letting me switch over here. And today, in the lab portion, we're going to talk about multi-page InDesign layouts. And so you guys have already become rather familiar with the general concepts in InDesign in terms of placing images and working with text and typography and that sort of thing. But now we're going to talk about how do I create really a multi-page document that becomes my portfolio. How do I set this up, and what kinds of things are built into InDesign to help me facilitate this setup process. And so I'm going to, again, create a document. And I think the temptation is always to pick a book or something, but just stick with a document. You're not creating a true book. And when I get the new document set up here, I want to make sure that I have the check mark for facing pages, assuming that I want to have facing pages in my portfolio. And facing pages, again, just means that I have two pages in my book like this. And as I go to open the pages, I have content. Sorry, I should flip it around. I have content on both pages. So I open the book. There's stuff on this side. There's stuff on that side. And I'm looking at it as a spread. You can also choose whether you want your portfolio to look like this or whether you want your portfolio to look like this. It's just a different setup. If you wanted it, I've seen successful portfolios that are more long and skinny versions. I've seen ones that are squares. I've seen ones that are 8.5 by 11s. And really, that's a matter. It's up to you. When I was applying to grad school, it was 8.5 by 11 maximum size and 12 pages maximum. So if I cut it down to 8 by 8 to do a square, as much as I like squares as the layout, I lost a bunch of page that I could put stuff on. So I ended up sticking with 8.5 by 11, but I also decided that I was going to do it in landscape orientation rather than portrait. For the ones that you'll see, the examples, I've seen very successful portrait ones. I've seen very successful landscape ones. It's just a matter of what feels right for you. And this is, again, part of the iterative process of figuring it out. If I do want content on both sides of the page, I'm going to make sure that I have a check mark in facing pages. I'm going to stick with a letter sized, but I am going to do my orientation sideways. For me, landscape feels right, so I'm going to do it set up as a landscape. But again, it's up to you. My width and height are already set here, so I don't have to set those. I'm not going to worry about my columns. And here under my margins, I'm going to set these all at 0 for right now. I'm going to set my own margins a little bit later on. I could, of course, specify a margin for the inside at maybe, let's do 3/8 of an inch, 0.375 inches. And I'm doing that just to, sorry, I'm going to leave the rest of these at 0. Just for the inside as a reminder that there's going to be a binding in there. So I want to be cautious about it. If you don't do this and you set them all at 0, there's nothing wrong with that as well. If I click on More Options, there's a little box right here. If I click on More Options, I get to my bleed and slug. We're going to work with bleed, and we're going to set it to 1/8 of an inch all the way across. So 0.125 inches. And I'm going to set all of them at 0.129 or 125. And they switch to, remember, all my units are in picas right now, which mean nothing. We'll convert that over in just a second. So I have that set up. I have bleed set. And I'll go ahead and say OK at this point. So as I start to look at this page, I've already kind of established a few things that I'm looking for. The borders of my page are the black line here. So that's everything that should be on my page. The red line that goes all the way around the outside, that is my bleed. So that's the extra bit of image that I'm including, just in case something gets cut funny when I go and cut it out. Again, it's optional, but I want to introduce you to that concept as well. I also set my inner margin at 3/8 of an inch, assuming that I was going to do some binding there. And it's just to protect myself as part of the binding. But the rest of this, I want the ability to go full bleed past my margins, so I set those all at 0. If you don't set your margins like that, it's not the end of the world. Margins are arbitrary, and you can always go back and change them. If you want to change them, you can go into File and then Document Setup. And you can come back. There's more options. Oh, wait, sorry. It's not there. It's under Layout, Margins, and Columns. And you can reset your margins there if you want to afterward. Yeah?
Later on, for example, if we're starting with a horizontal layout, can we switch the layout later?
You can switch the layout later, but obviously the stuff that you lay out horizontally isn't going to fit on the page that's vertical. But yes, you can change it later. That is available under the Document Setup. So if I go to File and then Document Setup, I can switch the orientation of the page there after the fact, should I want to. OK, so I have this page set up. The first page that I'm looking at here is really kind of the cover, which doesn't do anything for me right now because I'm not actually going to do the cover yet. We're going to do the cover a little bit later on, probably in Illustrator, and I'll talk you through creating that cover. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and move on to pages 2 and 3 from 1. So if I show over here, and I'm in the Advanced tool set, if you're in the Essentials, I believe this still shows, yes. I'm going to click on the Pages window. And you see here that I have page 1 highlighted in blue. It's numbered 1. I want to go ahead and create page 2 and page 3. So I'm going to come down here in the Pages window and click on the New Page button. And I'll create page 2 and page 3. And when I create page 2 and page 3, notice they're side by side. So 1 is essentially the cover. Then I move on to pages 2 and 3. 1 is the back side. Then we have the front side of that spread. I can continue and create more. I'll go to page 4 and page 5, page 6 and page 7. You get the idea. One of the great things about InDesign is we can reorder the pages afterward. So if you decide that you really wanted a page in a different order, you can change the order of pages. So just because I created it as pages 2 and 3 doesn't mean it has to stay page 2 and 3 forever. So let's continue a little bit more and start to set up this document as a multi-page document. So the first thing is maybe I want to set up some guides so that I'm consistent page to page to page for as I set things up. So let me go back up here. And if we look at the Pages window, up above, there's something called a master with some pages. You guys see that? It's right up there next to it. What InDesign has the ability to do is it has the ability to set up a master page that controls some of the things that will show up on every master page or on every page going forward, assuming you have that master page applied to it. So it's repetitive elements. So let me go ahead and show you an example. I'm going to leave a master as blank, and I'm going to create a new master. So I'll right-click on my masters up here, and I'll say New Master. This is going to be the B master, and I'll go ahead and say OK, and we'll see it listed there as B master. I'm going to double-click on the B master so that I can see the B master, which is right there. If I press Control 0, I can see both pages. Sorry, Control 0. I have to zoom out a little bit more. Anyway, I'm seeing the right page of the masters. Now let's say that I want to set up a guide, maybe down an inch across the page, something like that. I'll hold down Shift so that it jumps to be an inch. Oh, I'm still in picas. Hold on a second. Let me switch my units. I'm going to right-click on the where the rulers cross and switch to inches. There we go. I'll hold down Shift, and I want there to be a guide at 1 inch down. Now, if I do the guide inside this page, it's going to be contained within the page. If I do the guide outside, it's going to be a continuous line that goes all the way across both pages. So there's 2 different ways of doing the guide. I want this to go across both pages. And I'm going to start by filling the top of this page in with like a gray background or something. So I'm going to go to a rectangle, and I'm going to do a rectangle right there. Notice that I did go all the way up to the bleed. I don't want there to be a stroke color, but I want there to be a fill color. There's my fill color. And I want that fill color, I don't know, let's do it at maybe a 30% gray. Something like that. And I'll say OK. So there's my 30% gray. Now I want that to be on this page, but I also want it to be over here on this page. So I'll draw another one. There and there. And once again, I'll flip the colors and change it to be 30% gray. I could also have just copied that particular piece as well. Sorry. So now I have these gray bars that run across the top of the page. And this is again in the B master. So if I come down to page 2 and page 3, let me click on page 3, for example. I can right-click on page 3 and say Apply Master to Pages. And I can switch from A master to B master. And guess what? That gray bar shows up now on these pages. Let me make sure that it's on both of these as well. Apply master to pages. Let's make sure it's on the B master. There we go. And so now I have those 2 pieces showing up on that particular page. I just zoomed out so you could see it a little bit better. I cannot select those. They just exist in the background because they're on the A master. The advantage here, or excuse me, they're on the B master. The advantage here is, you know what, I didn't really like this shade of gray. Let me come back to my B master. Let me select that, and let me change that gray to actually be, I don't know, 50% gray. And I'll say OK, and let's change this one to be 50% gray as well. So now I have them as 50% gray. If I go back to pages 2 and 3, the colors change there as well. I could make the same master apply to page 4 and 5. I'll select those two. I'll right click and say apply master to pages. I want it to be the B master. And now that same thing shows up on these pages. So stuff that I do on the master will show up on every page that has that master applied. If I put text on this particular master, right? Let me just type something like portfolio. That's going to show up on every master. So in this context, I don't want there to be text because that doesn't change. It would be the same text on every page. So it really doesn't work. But this is the place that you would want to put little graphics that are about your project. Remember, he had the 9 cubes in the upper corner? You'd put that on the master. And it would show up on every page consistently in the same place. So if I wanted that little identifier, maybe I'd put it up here. Like that. Right, whatever. I could divide it up a little bit. I probably should have done a few more. Hold on a second. Let me. I'll do just 4 pages. So there's one. Make this white. Control C, Control V to create a second copy. Control C, Control V. Set that one up there. Put that one up there. I'm going to take all of these, those two, and I'm going to distribute. So I'm going to go back to my Align window. Objects and Layout, Align. And I want to use a spacing of 1/16 of an inch. We'll make sure that those are consistent there. I'll take this. Take this and this. There. Distribute vertically. Make sure that they're aligned there. I'll take this and this. Oops. There's my key object. Make sure they're aligned to the top and that their spacing is consistent. And then I'm going to select all 4 and group them. Control G will group so that they're one little group. And now that icon, let's throw that over there for a second, is going to show up on every page in that location. If I go to pages 2 and 3, they're all there. Do you guys see how that works? Okay.
And that's the B master?
And that everything that I'm doing is on the B master. You could start working on the A master. I generally keep one blank master, and then I start on B, C, D, etc. You can create more than, it could be B, C, D, E, J, K. You can have as many masters as you want. So now that I have that set up, sometimes there's other little bits of information that I'd like to include page after page. And so let's say that I want to have a page number in this lower corner. So if I come up to the B master, I could create a bit of text. And actually, let me do it up here at the top on this one. I don't know that I'm ultimately going to want this, but let me use this as an example. So let me create a little text box. There it is. And if I put the page number in text box, so let's say I put 2, for example, and I put this right above my object, right there, something like that, every page is going to have the 2 on it, which defeats the purpose. It's not a page number. I can't edit it. It doesn't work. But what InDesign has the ability to do is if we're in the master, instead of putting the text for the page number here, you can actually go into Type, Insert Special Character, and then under Markers, you can choose Current Page Number. And so it'll show up here as a B because it's the B master. But if I switch to page 3, it's going to show up as a 3. If I switch to page 5, it's going to show up as a 5. So that special character changes based on what page I have set up. Yeah. I'm going to do it on the other page, so let me do it. I'm going to go up to the masters. I'm going to create a new text box. Actually, I'm going to copy this text box so that they're consistent. Control-C, Control-V, and I'm going to move this over come on, to this side, like that. And maybe I'll adjust my orientation so that it's left justified now. And to insert the page number, I'm going to go to Type, Insert Special Character, Markers, Current Page Number. And it'll show up, because it's the B master, as a B. I can then show it down under pages 2 and 3, and now that's going to show up as a 2. There's the 3. I can go to 4 and 5. So that page number is showing up and changing. Now the really cool thing is, let's say that I put something on page 5. Let me place something in here. Trying to see if I have any content that I've collected. Apparently not.
Isn't the first one the cover page?
Page 1 is the cover page, yeah. Yeah. OK, so let's say that I put content here on page 5. Let me go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. There it is. OK, so I have some content on page 5. You know what? I really wish that page 5 was page 3. I can take page 5 and I can drag it so that it goes to where page 3 was. And notice that if we scroll up to page 3, that now has the content on it, but the page number changed. So it updated for me without me having to do anything as I go through and I start to set these things up. So now I have that 3. I can take it a step further and use something called a section marker as well. So let's say that I had a project, and we'll call it project 1, for example. And project 1 is going to start on page 2, right here. I can right-click on page 2, and I can go to my numbering and section options right here. And if I open that up, I could say I want to start a new section. I want to start my page numbering at, you could specify a particular number. I'm just going to keep with automatic page numbering. But then I have something for section prefix and section marker. So section prefix, maybe this would be P1 for project 1. And then under section marker, I'll say this is project 1. And I put little brackets around it because that's what I want to have show up later on. This is whatever you want, the text that you want to show up. And again, you can edit this later on. So I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And in my pages, I get a little triangle above the page that says I've set up a section marker. And I know this is a little bit more advanced. So if you guys don't get to doing this, it's not the end of the world. You could do this manually, too, if you wanted to. But I like to try to show you these things that are built into InDesign. So let me go up to my master. This is, again, my B master. Let me come to this page here. Let me go right there. Let me take this text. I'm going to copy it, Control-C, Control-V, and I'm going to drop it below my object. So we'll go right there. And this time, instead of the B, I'm going to go to Object, or excuse me, Type, Insert can't talk. Insert Special Character, Markers, Section Marker. So instead of current page number, I'm going to choose Section Marker, and it's just going to say Section, which is fine. However, let me make it a little bit bigger because I need a little bit more space here. When I go to anything after that section marker has been established, that's going to be replaced with project 1. So let's say project 2 starts on, let's say it starts on page 6, right here. I'll right-click, and I'll go to Numbering and Section Options. This is now P2. Section marker, this is going to be project 2. I'll say OK. I get a new triangle. Let me apply that master to these pages. Right click, apply master to pages. This should have been the B master. Okay. And so as I scroll down here, there I am on page 3. This is project 1. There's page 5. This is still project 1. Now I moved on, and here I am in project 2. So that text is automatically updating as well. So this is how you can transfer text through various layouts. So I have those set up, but I can also, in these masters, I could set up other rules for myself. So for example, if I wanted to set up the 1/3, 2/3 lines, I could say, OK, let's see, where's 1/3? It's right about there. Then I'm doing this by I there. I could do the same thing with it on this side. Make sure these are even here. There we go. So I have those lines there that are falling on each page. And maybe I want to show one more line that goes across the bottom here at 1 inch up, something like that. OK, so now as I start to fill this out, I could put a frame on this master that would show up on every page. So I could say, OK, here's my frame right there. And then I could go ahead and when I move to any one of these objects, if I went to File and then Place, I could actually place it into that frame that I created on the master. To me, when you start to create frames on the master, though, you're restricting your layout options. So generally speaking, I try not to put the frames on the master. I try to stick with just guides. So you saw I put the 1/3 line. I put this line down here at the bottom. Any of your flow lines or your column lines, that's kind of where they belong. That's where I would set them up and have them show. Text boxes don't work quite as nicely. So if on this master I threw in a text box, to put some content in, there's my text box, and then I went to my page, the only way to get text inside of that box is to place it in. So you have to have it referenced in a Word file or something and drop it in that way. Personally, I would rather create my text box. Go back up to my master here. I would rather create my text box on the page itself.
If you already had a text box and you updated it later, like you put one in and then later you come back to the document, if you want to change the text or leave the box where it is,
You can just select the box and replace it. Put the new text in, right. Or you can update the link, one or the other. So anyway, I generally put this in. I decide on what is happening on. Oh, I need to. The other thing that you can do is I believe that you can fill in with the Latin just to see how this is going to look. And I always forget where I find this. Fill with placeholder text. There we go. So that it looks like a paragraph. So that was under Type, Fill with placeholder text. And this will let you, see what the right font size is. So maybe this needs to be 10 point. And maybe I wanted this to be Arial. And I could take a look. Oh, does that seem like it fits nicely? What I do when I want to copy this text to multiple pages, so I want this same block of text to show up down here, is I'll take the block and I'll go to Edit, Copy. And when I move to the next page down here, I'm going to go to Edit, Paste in Place. So instead of just paste, it's Paste in Place, which is going to drop it in exactly the same place on the same page. So anyway, you get the idea of kind of how I'm setting that up. Let's see, what else did I want to show you? You've got numbering and section options. You've got page numbers. You've got masters. You've got placing objects. I think that probably covers the bulk of what you need for today. So I want you to start with pages 2 and 3 of your portfolio. This is probably your table of contents and your information about yourself, both of which you at least have 2 projects because you've done 2 projects so far in this class. Then move on to pages 3 and 4, which would be your first 2 project pages, potentially. Maybe you need one spread for each assignment. I don't know. Start working through those. So I'm expecting today for you to get maybe 4 pages out, maybe 6 pages, depending on kind of how much content you have and what you want to put in. But I want you to play around with these options and start to feel comfortable with setting up this file. You will come back and you will revisit this throughout the semester, so you can obviously make changes as you go forward. Yeah.
Would you like us to add text to it or just the image?
So people ask about text, and this is one of those tricky things. And it's easy to set up a layout like, oh, I like this layout, and I've got this whole column of text. That'll be great. But when it comes to actually doing your portfolio, at some point you have to write the text, and you have to decide what's going to go there. And a lot of times, if you have this big column block of text, you don't have that much text to put in. And so it looks awkward because you haven't put that much text in. So at this point, I would err on less text is probably better. Some people are long-winded and like to use text to describe what's going on, in which case it's appropriate for you. If you don't want to do that, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no text requirement as part of this portfolio. Okay? So I'm going to go in and grab the portfolios. I'll put them in the back so you guys can look at previous examples and kind of get the ball rolling a little bit as you think through this. I will also come around and I will pass out your grade sheets in a little bit so that you can see what you got on assignment 102. Remember, your assignment 103 is due on Wednesday, right? Yeah? Okay. I'm just making sure. I think my assignment in my other class is due today, so I had to make sure the days were set correct. Yeah?
Question, how did you make it look like you can see pages 1 and 2, then 2 and 3 on the bottom when you zoom out?
Oh, if you just zoom out, Control minus, you can see all the pages at once. So the further out you go. You're up in the masters. You have to double click on one of the actual pages. Okay, are there any questions? Yeah. Individual or for everybody? Okay, I'll come and help you in just a second.